the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening, folks. It's Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, bringing you another edition of The Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the Grand Solar Minimum. Thanks for joining us tonight on this Wednesday evening, June 27th. Our special guest tonight has been on the program before, and she's a favorite of our listeners, Dr. Anita Bailey, Ph.D. She has been working hand and foot, day and night, on this dossier that she just released to the public, and we're going to be talking about it tonight, EMP, CME, and Grand Solar Minimum, preparing for the risks of electrical grid disruptions at the coming Grand Solar Minimum. Dr. Bailey, are you there?
I am.
Welcome. Well, I can't say enough about your research into this topic. I mean, what we have is a 26-page dossier on very important information with regards to electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, coronal mass ejection, or CME, and how they are related to the fragility of our existing power grid, other electronics, including satellites, and the Grand Solar Minimum. I mean, are they related? How are they related? And we're going to be unraveling it piece by piece tonight, thanks to you. Do you have any initial words? Can you tell us how the research went?
Well, first I want to thank you for having me on and let you know I really appreciate the time and effort you spend getting the word out to folks. It's so important. Now, on the research, really, what happened was I started hearing the ramp up of media interest back in EMPs and CMEs a couple of months ago. I thought, I really don't know enough about this to make an informed decision. So I started doing research really for my own interest, and this is what happens when you do that. Start making notes, and before you know it, you've got a whole bunch of notes, and I figured it might be useful for other people to know the same thing.
Indeed, it might be one of the most useful documents coming out in these times to prepare for events which I believe in the short term, and when I mean that, less than 10 years, are inevitable. I don't think we should get into predicting any timeline right now, but I do want to reiterate to those of you listening that many of you that watch our channel where we're trying to provide you information, it's wonderful that you watch every night, but the majority of you, unfortunately, don't even know where the show more box is below the video, where I have spent most of the time. So most of the time is really gathering the references. It's not producing the video. It's not finding the articles, because search engines do that for me. It's actually putting the links concisely all down so that you can do your own homework and research into what I'm saying to verify that I'm using factual information. You don't have to agree with everything I say, but you have to learn to start to do your research. Time is running out, and you can't just be listening to everyone talking on YouTube especially and believing what they're saying without verifying their sources. Do you agree with me, Anita?
Oh, I do. And I suspect that show more little area there is so light-colored and gray. I'm half thinking it's that way so that people don't see it. Because it doesn't stand out. Your vision goes right past it when you're looking at stuff. All the colored pictures and flashing lights, So, but now that people know about it, let them click on it. It is excellent material on your site.
Yeah, and if you don't know what we're talking about, ask your neighbor, ask a kid, ask someone young. Say, hey, how do you get the links under a video on YouTube? It's different on a laptop. It's different on a phone. On a phone, it's just this weird little down arrow that's a black pointy. So just ask someone. Don't be afraid to learn how to actually use the devices you have. They may save your life. Now let's get on with this awesome paper, EMP, CME, and grand solar minimum. Now the purpose was, you just stated, was because you really didn't have the background knowledge to assess all the risks. Now, and you're one of the most prolific people I know in preparedness in the world. I mean, so it's just like you, Anita, to go out and to create a paper like this. Now, the way you shared it with the public for free, you didn't make a book about it, really speaks to the type of human you are. And I want to thank you for who you are and for being my friend.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, let's jump right in. So it's important for everyone listening tonight to understand the phenomena of EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, CME, which is a type of electromagnetic pulse coming from our sun. You guys that watch Suspicious Observers will know that as coronal mass ejection. This is when a sunspot reaches magnetic instability, and in that zone there can be an ejection of plasma towards Earth or anywhere else in the solar system. And what does the grand solar minimum have to do with it? So, Anita, do you want to start with the background on the language of the different phenomena?
I sure do, because we need to have our feet on the same part of ground before we move on and start talking about these things.
Agreed.
First of all, sunspots. We've all heard about sunspots, and those are those extremely bright areas that occur on the sun's surface, and they have sections in them that are positively charged and negatively charged. And more often than not, they just sit there and careen around the sun as it's turning around. So we're looking at the sun, and we see the spot appear on the left-hand side, and it crosses all the way over to the right-hand side. And more often than not, they're just pretty, and they sit there and they sparkle. Okay, that's a beautiful thing. Now, more sunspots appear during solar maxima, which we are not in now, and less during solar minima. And, of course, during a grand solar minimum, they almost completely go away. And so that's the time period that we're coming into now. Second thing is a solar flare, Now, solar flares often occur when a sunspot's positive and negative charges mingle. And this causes a launch of charged particles off of the surface of the sun. It comes in a pulse, and it usually comes as white light with X-rays and gamma rays and ultraviolet, and it couples or interacts with the Earth's magnetic shield and generates auroras. And it also messes with radio transmission. So solar flares are pretty exciting. They can be very strong, and they can be weak, fairly weak. They're defined by an alphabetical system. So an A-class solar flare is very small, almost nothing there. A B-class is something that occurs from time to time. C, M, and X-class flares are the strongest ones. And those have a more likelihood of interacting with the Earth in a negative fashion, okay, in Earth-based systems specifically. X is the highest. And then there is a further division of the classification of flares with numbers. So a X23 would be less than a X45, for example. There are some estimates that the big Carrington event was an X100, but nobody knows really. Okay.
If I might jump in here quickly.
Sure.
If you're listening, it's very similar to the earthquake scale in that it's logarithmic. Yeah. You know, so when we have a magnitude 5 earthquake, or a 5.1 is 100 times greater than the 5, and a 5.2 is 100 times greater than the 5.1, or 10 times, I apologize, and so on and so forth, logarithmically, similar to the X flares. So an X2 versus a 3, the X3 is much, much greater than an X2, logarithmically. So just going from 49 to 50 is saying something. So when we're talking X100, it's off the charts. It would be like having a magnitude 9.9 earthquake on Earth. It would be unprecedented. And the most recent major flare we had was just back in the fall, and it actually shot off the back end. It wasn't Earth-facing, thankfully, and it's estimated to be around X47, just like you said.
Yeah. Huge, absolutely huge. Thank goodness it wasn't aimed our way because we sure weren't ready for it.
No.
Okay. The next item to think about is a coronal hole. Now, these are not actual holes. It's simply a slightly cooler area on the sun surface with a lower magnetic field energy that appears dark in our technology when we look at it. Now, coronal holes can change shape throughout the time that they're visible to us. They can cover a little tiny area or big area. They're not necessarily round. They can be angular. During solar maxima, the coronal holes tend to concentrate near the north and south pole of the sun. During solar minima, like now, they tend to go more near the equator. A coronal hole releases what is called a solar wind, which, once again, it's superheated, high-speed, charged particles that interact and couple with Earth's magnetic field and the atmosphere. Now, this solar wind can affect the grid, it can affect satellites, GPS, cause auroras, but it doesn't generate an EMP. It's kind of like a giant static charge coming in, although that's a real simplified comparison. Okay, now let's move on to the electromagnetic pulse so that we're all on the same page. Now, EMPs come as both natural forms and as man-made forms. For instance, man-made form might include what comes off a microwave, a TV, a radio, your mobile phone, power cables. These are not necessarily dangerous levels, although there are people who think they are. Lightning can cause an EMP. There are electrostatic discharges, and they can be huge, that are like an EMP. And there is some evidence that when an asteroid hit the moon, it generated an EMP. This all ties back to that electric universe concept, because apparently there's all these charges and electrical things going on that we had no idea about. Now, the biggest, scariest EMP is generated from a nuclear blast in the upper atmosphere, okay? It doesn't have to be a gigantic nuclear bomb. It could be one of the older style ones, but it puts off this huge pulse of energy. The pulse effect varies depending not only on the altitude at which the nuclear bomb is set off, but also on what's going on in the atmosphere. Is it hitting a thunderstorm, or is it a clear day? Competing electrical or geomagnetic fields. Suppose the Earth is getting ready to have an earthquake, and it's setting up some kind of geomagnetic field there. That's going to compete with the EMP effect. What kind of shielding you have, the density and the composition of what the EMP hits. So an EMP can penetrate soil down to 30 inches in one study they found. It does propagate or follow along oil and gas pipelines. That I did not realize that. I was kind of surprised and kind of horrified, because if you think of all of the pipelines everywhere, I hate the idea of a whole bunch of electrical energy traveling along those things. In research, they have found that exposure to an EMP field, like people who work with EMPs and experiment with it, there is a slight increase in leukemia among those people. So we know it can have these artificially generated EMPs can have a physical effect on people. There's two primary types of basic nuclear EMPs. And kind of keep that in the back of your mind that a CME, a coronal mass ejection, is an EMP, but we'll get there. It's not of these two types. The first type is called an E1. It is the fastest moving. It arrives in nanoseconds after the blast. Basically, when the blast happens, it hits. Okay? And that can affect electronics of all types, satellites. Everything that it hits that has an electrical component can be affected. Can is the key word here because of all those other factors, the atmosphere and the shielding and what have you. Now that E1 EMP is followed immediately by the E2, and that can take seconds to minutes, okay? That one affects the radio signals, the grid, electronics, and interestingly, an E2 EMP is also the type caused by lightning, electric universe again. So the E1 and E2 effects depend on the strength of the blast and how close it is as well. Now we'll move on to the CME. This is the third type of EMP called a E3, surprisingly. It is an energetic, ionized pulse of electromagnetic energy from the sun's surface, its corona. Billions of tons of ionized material are ejected during a CME, and it arrives hours to minutes after it's shot off of the sun. I believe the Carrington event, the CME that occurred there, took 17 hours to reach the Earth, the bulk of it. It can be small, and it can be supersized. And the Carrington event is generally used as the primary example of a gigantic super CME. Now, after looking at that, in my head, I have this thing that says all CMEs are going to destroy the Earth. Just hopefully they're not going to aim here. But the reality is that CMEs occur 3 to 5 times a week on average during minima and around 21 times a week during the maxima. So they're going off pretty much all the time. The nice thing is that they're mostly missing us. That's the best part. And they're small. Most of them are small. They're not gigantic. Now, a CME E3 EMP, in order to cause effects on Earth, requires what amounts to a long antenna. Different sources say 300 feet to several kilometers in length. Okay, so basically people don't have an agreement on that. But we do know that a longer antenna equals more power. It's going to have a bigger charge. And a bigger charge means a potentially greater impact on the grid. Now, the key thing to take home from all of this, even though we've named a bunch of things here, is here's a quote from a researcher from January of this year. He said, despite many years of study, the dominant driver and energy sources of CMEs is still under investigation. And that basically means we still don't know what we're looking at. We think we know. We've got some ideas. There's a lot of theories, huge number of pieces of research where people are saying, here, I think it's this, and somebody else says, no, it's not that because of this. It's this other thing, and somebody else comes in and says, no, you're both wrong. We just don't know. That's the state of the science today. And I think part of the reason is, first, here's my hypothesis. The reason we don't know much is there's no money in knowing a lot about the CME. The research funds aren't there, and it's kind of Yeah, well, it never happened, so it's a research area for people who are, kind of science nerds, and they don't care if they get a lot of funding. And that's maybe super simplifying the situation. It's just not well researched. So we're left with a lot of implication and suggestions on what's going on, what we're looking at. Now, the super secret government labs could be doing all kinds of research on this, but they're not telling us. So we're as the human beings here, we're in the dark. So we have to look at history. That's the only way we can get a grasp on what's going on here, lacking all of the scientific experiments and equipment. We know the Carrington event. That is the signal event from 1859, August 28th through September 2nd, thereabouts, depending on what part of the world you were in. It was the largest CME observed in the modern era. It's in spite of them being many CMEs in the historical record, there is evidence in the ice cores that some of them leave a signature. The Carrington event apparently didn't leave this signature in ice cores, or if it did, it was a fairly small one. So we're back to, we don't quite know what these are, why they're doing what they're doing. The Carrington event came in two actual pulses. We call it an event, one thing, but it was at least two pulses. The first one was August 28th. It was smaller. It created auroras. It messed with the telegraph system. There was problems sending the signal. The second one was the big, gigantic one. Now, Richard C. Carrington, was the scientist who was studying these flares. And he was looking into a special telescope that allowed him to see a sunspot, and he was sketching the picture of this sunspot. He was having a great time. And all of a sudden, this huge bright light occurred, and it actually half blinded him. And he ran out of the room to get somebody else to come in and look at it. And by the time he got somebody in there, I'm sure he was pretty excited, the light was dying down already. So he noted that, saw this big light, and the sunspot had changed shape by then. That was the September giant CME. Now, CME sometimes accompany solar flares. We don't know if they cause them or if they are generated by a solar flare, but you don't necessarily need a solar flare to have a CME. But
if I could jump in here, I could add a little piece that's not in the paper, and that's the plasma filament. So these coronal mass ejections do not always occur during a solar flare. Like you said, even an X-flare doesn't have to have a coronal mass ejection. It's only when there's actual material ejected from the surface of the sun that is a CME. And I believe that the Carrington event was such a major ejection of material that the initial blast on August, 2 days before the second blast, was the shock wave. So the initial shock wave charged the atmosphere, and in fact, reports say that you could read a newspaper at night to the glow in the sky in most of the northern hemisphere for days. And then the second part is when the material hits, and that's when the stuff hits the fan.
Yes, exactly right. There were reports of auroras seen from Australia, Asia, Europe, North America. There was disruption of 150,000 miles of telegraph lines. Basically, these telegraph lines, primitive technology compared to today, became giant collecting antenna. They collected that charge and sent it all over the place. The transatlantic cable under the Atlantic Ocean, newly laid, was completely destroyed. So it's under a huge quantity of water, and yet it carried the charge enough to destroy it. Overhead telegraph lines heated and sagged and set fires in forests and out in unpopulated areas. There was enough charge in those telegraph lines to set fire to telegraph stations, to papers within the stations. One telegrapher was sitting next to his sending machine, put his hand on a plate, and a charge leaped from the machine into his head and exited his foot. An old fellow who was sitting there watching said it looked like a giant lightning bolt came out and hit him in the head. He wasn't killed, but I'm sure he was killed by it. Even the charge in the lines was powerful enough to carry telegraph signals even when the batteries were disconnected from their system. They were all battery systems. There is a really excellent book, and I wish I had seen it when I was working on the paper, called Solar Storms, written in 2015 by a fellow by the name of Odenwald, with a lot of first-person accounts from the Carrington event and newspaper accounts and things like that. And it's just astonishing to read how huge this was.
Yeah. And imagine if it happened today.
And that's where we move into next. This kind of E3 CME. Remember, this is an EMP. It just is a specialized kind. Anything that is attached to the giant collecting antenna that is our grid is potentially something that could be affected by it. And also think, too, something you mentioned on your program a couple of days ago was the geomagnetic induced current, the GIC. And I think you were talking about the northeast U.S. having the particular kind of geological structure that acts to bounce the energy back up from...
Yeah, the entire northeast is basically a granitic pluton, which is an insulator, so it would literally go in the ground and come back up back into the lines, so in that entire region.
Just imagine. That just... Okay, so think of those long power lines. You just go outside and look at the power lines and see where they go. Everything that's connected to that power line potentially becomes a grounding, a place where the energy can come down to Earth and dissipate, right? What's plugged into your power lines at home today, right now? Appliances, your computer, your phone, every ATM in the country, banks. How about your smart meter that they bill you for, right? Your charging cell phone. How about electric cars when they get plugged in? Well, what do you suppose might happen to those babies if they get a huge charge coming into them? How about
that's a boom.
A big boom. Those self-driving cars, how do they operate? They're all electronic, right? They're not mechanical, they're electronic. Could they be affected if they're plugged in? Do they have enough wiring inside of them to act as a collector on their own? I don't know. Nobody knows. Or if somebody knows, they're not telling us. Modern cars laden with electronics. One researcher said every modern car will be affected. Everyone, to some degree. And some degree, big question mark. Depends on where it is, how it's lined up. If it's in a metal building, such as a garage, that might shield it. We just plain don't know. Satellites, for sure, are going to be hit because they've been hit before. Satellites, of course, are involved in navigation and GPS. Once those satellites are hit, they start to charge. They get a charge on the exterior, and that can feed into the electronics on the interior. There is some indication that people who were in the International Space Station during, I believe it was 2003, had to shelter inside the space station in the center of it, and still they were affected by it. One report said that they had some radiation effect to the astronauts, and they didn't identify what those were. And did they lose their hair? They don't say. But some of those astronauts reported visual shooting stars, which seems to sound like some kind of cosmic ray particles affecting the retina. So we just don't understand this.
Well, indeed, there are reports of aboriginals that know about high cosmic ray flux periods, and they do this. Now, these shaman are able to go into dark caves and close their eyes and see the cosmic rays hitting the back of their retina. So that is a strange corroboration of information from modern man and ancient mythology.
That is fascinating. Really, we've forgotten so much. In this modern era, when we think we're smart, we've forgotten so much. More antenna. How about railroad tracks? They're metal, right? Are they going to be giant antenna? We already know that geomagnetic induced currents, the GIC, can affect railroad signaling systems. Of course, radios will have interference, and power plants. Ooh-wee, this is where we start getting into the grid. The transformers in the power plants have been known to be damaged during CMEs. The big Quebec CME of 1989, the transformer looks like, there's pictures of it, you can find it on the grid, it looks like a burned bunch of stacked waffles. Yeah. All of the layers of it just toast, absolutely toasted. According to a book called Blackout Wars, which is also a very good source, there's about 3,000 independent electric utilities in the United States alone, 3,000 of them. But there's no command and control for coordinating them. So we don't know. Some may fail, some might not. Do the ones that fail start interfering with power generation across state lines and throughout? We just don't know.
Yeah, and a side note here, maybe you can fill us in and our listeners, is that after the 1989 Quebec CME, which fried the grid there, which is absolutely primer for things to come, any hardening of the grid, and that means protection from this type of CME or EMP event, was only done to protect from a similar 1989 Quebec event, and not a Carrington event.
Bingo. Same thing with satellites. After that occurred, now the testing is based on the 1989. Well, that's good. I mean, it's better to have some hardening, but we know CMEs can be bigger. And we also know that Carrington-class CMEs affect the Earth roughly once a century, once every 100 years. But we haven't had one since 1859, so it's overdue. It's going to happen. We just don't know when. I wanted to mention, too, that aircraft in flight may be affected, but once again, we're not certain. There's certainly a lot of electronics on board, but aircraft are designed to tolerate lightning strikes because they happen from time to time. Then that's an E2 EMP. So we know that they have some protection. One authority said that any aircraft that suddenly loses power during an EMP or a CME, their plan is to coast to the nearest airport. Oh, goodness. Imagine just being in an airport flight path of some kind with dozens of airplanes coasting in. Yeah. Oh, goodness. I could not find any research that actually created and tested a E3 class CME type EMP. So they could be doing this testing. Apparently, Los Alamos Labs, I believe it is in New Mexico, does have an EMP generator, and some car manufacturers have been testing their automobiles in that. But it's secret. You don't even know the names of the manufacturers or which models are testing or what their results are. but that they're testing with a E1 and an E2 nuclear type generated EMP, not necessarily an E3. So, can EMPs affect humans? And we're talking EMPs, specifically E1 and E2. Yes, there is research that shows that EMPs will increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. In other words, things that your body protects your brain from that are circulating in your blood, viruses and things like that, may be able to get into your brain if you're under the effect of an EMP. Maybe, I don't know how long the effect lasts. Moments? How many virus could get through in moments? Days? Weeks? In studies on rats, they found that a particular protein, beta amyloid, that is associated with Alzheimer's is increased when the rats are exposed to EMPs. Could be a stress effect. Once again, not sure why, but the risk for Alzheimer's goes up if you're a rat and you're exposed to EMP. That may apply to people as well. Now, CME...
So the zombie apocalypse may be triggered by an EMP.
That's right. Yeah. Rather than virus. That's a good thing. CMEs, however, have been demonstrated repeatedly to worsen the effects of multiple sclerosis symptoms in some people. Some people are sensitive to it. And something you've talked about before, there is an increase in risk for rupture of brain aneurysms. An aneurysm is like a bulging on a blood vessel in the brain, a weakened area. Well, if that ruptures, the person who has that gets a stroke.
Yeah, and John Casey, back in September during our X9 event,
yes,
which came to Earth as a geomagnetic storm at G8, is when he had his stroke.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as anybody knows, there is no damage otherwise to plants or livestock that are in good health. But, of course, you can't look inside the animal and see if something's gone on in there that wouldn't have happened. Maybe they miscarry their offspring or something. Once again, I'm back to we don't know. And I hate to keep saying that, but we're really in quite a gray area with this thing. Now, the GSM...
or we're being kept in a gray area. Let's reiterate that.
And that's possible. That's very possible. Because we're in a gray area, we don't know. The grand solar minimum, remember that there are fewer CMEs occurring during minima of all kinds. Most are small, most miss the Earth, or if they're big, they glance off. That's a good thing. One researcher, a fellow by the name of Riley, sat down and set up a model and determined that there was a roughly 1 in 10 chance of a Carrington-class event by 2026. He did his research in 2016. He said within 10 years. He had previously researched it with a different model, and he said there was a 1 in 8 chance within 10 years of that study. So he's refining his model and trying to figure out. Now, I want to do a little side excursion here, if you don't mind.
Please.
And that is in statistics and the creation of models. We hear a lot about the models involved in the global warming and the spaghetti model, they call it, because it's all over the place. You got everybody's thrown together what they think is involved with global warming, and they generate what they think is going to happen next from it. Usually linearly, they have no concept of cycles. A model is only as good as what you put into it. And if what you put into it is wrong, is incomplete, ignores some huge factor, your results are going to be wrong. Years and years ago, when I took statistics, the first words, first day in class, out of the professor's mouth was, "I'm going to teach you some lies. This entire course is a lie because a model is not reality." And obviously that stuck with me. And this was a very respected statistician, and he had to right up front say, what we're creating with statistics and with model creation isn't the real world, because we can't put in all the factors that can affect something. When we do scientific research, we try to pull out of reality a handful of things that we think have an effect on something. And we set them down in a line and draw them together and try to make sense out of this one little thing by creating this model of it. It's like trying to make a person out of wax or out of clay and say, well, now I've created a person and this is going to be adequate as an example of humanity. But stuff is missing, you know. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Models are not reality. So when a researcher sits down and says, here's my model, and this is what I put into it, and this is why I did this and this, he's explaining what he put in and what he left out. And this particular researcher, Riley, who said the 1 in 10 chance of a Carrington-class event, he said at a couple points in his paper, this is subjective, but I threw it in. He didn't quite say I threw it in. He said, I included this. It is a subjective decision. Subjective means, effectively, I made this up. Okay? I created this out of my feelings. So he basically said, my model is incomplete, and I hope it's close, but really, I just kind of felt like that fit. So I don't want to beat up on the guy because he got his paper published, and, you know, that's work, right? But we have to keep in mind that even something that is as seriously stated as this is going to happen, we have a 10% chance it's going to happen, he could be entirely wrong. It could happen tomorrow. Or it could happen 20 years from now. It's going to happen because it is cyclic, does happen. So what we know right now is that the next Carrington-class superstorm is about 50 years overdue. So
yeah, and we're 50 years overdue for a magnitude 9 earthquake in Cascadia. So we're waiting on a Mag 9 earthquake in Cascadia and a Carrington-class event to be Earth-facing. Yeah. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen in a decade. It could happen in our children's lives. But based on the statistical analysis, we need to be prepared for it now because it's long overdue.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. And any of your listeners who are living in Cascadia, please consider moving. You really don't want to be there when that baby comes down. Okay. Now we've kind of covered that a little bit. Is there anything you think we need to focus on there? Because there's more risks that could be associated with it.
Yeah, we should let everyone know that as we're descending into this grand solar minimum and the sun is flaring less, there is new papers coming out of plasma physics that say that just because the sunspot groups are less doesn't mean that the flares can't be as intense. They just are less frequent. So there's the same amount of probability of an X flare happening, just much less chance, meaning periodicity. So an X40 could shoot out. It could be the 1, and it could be Earth-facing during a minimum. Now, this is happening the same time that our magnetosphere is rapidly declining, which is putting our grid at risk increasingly day after day, which is an independent event unrelated to the grand solar minimum that is happening now. And it's estimated by 2035, we could be diminished as down to almost 20% of our magnetosphere, which would be devastating to the grid because a large M-class flare could fry the grid at that point.
That's true. Absolutely right. And once again, the risks increase as we go through time. And as you said, just because there's fewer doesn't mean they're weaker. And with the shields down on Earth, even a weak pulse can get through.
Yeah.
The additional risks here that can go with it is, of course, we got to start with the multiple pulse risk. Okay, we know the Carrington had two parts, a smaller and then a stronger. But there was a CME in October of 2003, the Halloween CME, and that was followed on November 4th by a powerful X-ray flare that did not cause any auroras. And that one was the one that caused the astronauts to have to retreat to the interior of the space station, and had multiple effects on the Earth as well. So you can have multiple pulses. Suppose you have an overlapping natural CME and some bad guy out there decides they're going to launch their EMP to coincide with that. So that's piggybacking a nuclear EMP on top of a CME. So we're expecting an E3, and in comes E1, E2, and E3. The grid's lost at that point. Everything's pretty well fried. Now, the odds of that happening, unknown. And once again, I got to go, my personal opinion is that in spite of the media harping on North Korea and everybody else who's got the potential for an EMP weapon, something launched over the United States ends up damaging and destroying the entire planet's economy. So somebody who's concerned about having an income next year or having food to eat is probably not going to try to destroy the U.S. economy.
Yeah, probably not.
Rational, okay? But, and I also want to point out that the media focus on EMPs and now CMEs seems to follow its own little cycle. It's roughly every 2 years, and if you go and look at the literature, you see it rises in importance and everybody's talking about it and panicking, and then it kind of fades away and nobody's talking about it anymore. So that kind of bothered me as I saw that pattern arise, because it suggested to me that there are some people or powers who benefit from ramping up concern about it. But I'll talk about that after a little bit. Right now we're looking at those additional risks. So we've talked about the overlapping natural and nuclear. How about a CME occurring with somebody going out and shooting up a bunch of power plants? Okay, we've already had instances out in California where some unknown group got together and decided they were going to shoot up transformers, and they wrecked a power plant and shut down the power and the internet over a large part of the state there for a while. If a CME is incoming and somebody's pretty mad at somebody else, they could do that regionally. And because of the CME, you may not be able to trace it back to any one individual or group. So there's a risk of that, too. A CME coming in with, say, cyber attacks to the grid. You've got this huge pulse coming in. You know it's going to affect the grid, and you're a country that's really mad at, say, New York City. Suppose you just push the button that turns off all the power in New York. I don't know if cyber hackers can do that, but I'm pretty sure they have the ability to get in and mess with bank systems and people's personal computers and goodness knows whatever is attached to the internet.
Well, so what happens when the CME comes in, Carrington style, and the whole planet lights on fire? How about that time?
Yeah. Fires.
Because that's what's going to happen. We are so interconnected by these wires and pipelines. Any major event, even if it's regional, one side of the earth, it's going to light the whole side of the earth on fire.
Yeah, and I have seen very little discussion of that. I think I saw one program out of Japan that showed people running around the house with little fire extinguishers after a CME and putting out fires in their house. And I thought, well, that's peculiar. Nobody's ever talked about that here. And I started thinking, holy smokes, you've got these giant antenna bringing in this unimaginable surge of power. My little surge protectors are not going to save my computer. They're not. If the power comes through my house, what if the lines in my walls start melting? Now
we have information coming in that the wildfires that were happening in California last year were not from laser beams or some type of weapon. They were because California Power and Electric didn't cut the branches from their lines, and they started fires that way in a dry situation. Now we're talking about a coronal mass ejection, Carrington style. We are going to light the forests up, and it is going to be biblical.
Yeah. I think the risk is really there, and even if you're running around inside your house with a fire extinguisher putting posts out, that doesn't mean your neighbor is.
You're right.
When your neighbor's house catches on fire, it's going to propagate to your house, and the neighborhood's gone, and the city's gone.
Well, and all the emergency preparedness now is completely tied up in an instant.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Exactly right. And any disaster personnel are suddenly dealing with their house on fire, their cell phone's not working, they don't know if they're called up, they don't know where their family is, the kids are at school, oh my gosh, I got to go check on the kids, my car won't start. I mean, how huge this could get really quickly. What a great disaster movie this would make if it was done right. Except everybody dies, so it's I shouldn't laugh, it's horrifying, but it really is. One study of hospital workers found that during an ordinary or a commonplace disaster, the kind that are predictable, or more or less predictable, tornadoes and hurricanes, floods, that sort of thing, half of the hospital workers said they're not going to come in. Half of them.
Yeah, we've discussed this before. North America in general is extremely unprepared. Maybe 5-7 decades ago, we were more prepared. We are currently, in this modern epoch, the most unprepared society ever in history.
And the strange thing is that people feel prepared. People feel safe. And
the technology is going to save them as it lights the world on fire.
That's sad but true. It really is. We have this illusion of perfect security because we can get on our phone and access information, and it's a false security, very, very false, because information is not reality. It's like that model of the world. We think that what's on our phone is the world, and it isn't.
Now, what we do see globally happening is more countries like Sweden sending out preparedness tips or packets to the populace. But these are basically, at time of war type preparedness where you should have a couple months of food put up and, canning and all that stuff, clean water and candles. Very few people talking about the impending solar storm that is going to wipe out the grid. Now, and depending on the severity, could light the planet on fire, as well as a lot of people. So the number one tip is when we warn you that there's this incoming major flare solar storm happening, grid frying event, get away from power centers, get away from power grids, don't touch anything metal, turn everything off, kill your breakers. You've heard Lee and I talk about it. It is coming, and you're going to have very little notice. The average time that one of these major flares takes to get to Earth is 12 to 72 hours, usually coming in two pulses, shockwave first, and then they reverberate. So if it's a huge event, it could go on for days and days, up and down and up and down. Each time it comes back up, lighting more things on fire. And it will be insane when it unfolds and when it happens, and it will happen. So what do we know? Can we do the summary of what is known?
You bet we can. We know that during a grand solar minimum, there can be 3 to 5 CMEs per week. Carrington-class is 50 years overdue. We don't understand CMEs. There's no way to predict when one could occur. These high-intensity CMEs have shut down portions of the grid in the past, caused fires along the lines, ignited combustibles at the end point, like your toaster. Grid-dependent electronics can experience partial or complete failures. And of course, that's the scary part. Some vehicles can stop. Some have electronic glitches. Imagine you're tooling down the highway at 70 miles an hour. Suddenly your dashboard starts blinking and your airbag goes off. And that happens to every car around you. Can you imagine the accidents and the gridlock from that? It's staggering. Some vehicles, even if they are protected and they survive those initial blasts, how are you going to drive them if you don't have a big supply of gasoline or diesel? Uh-oh.
Oh, that's the commercial break. We're going to finish the summary when we get back, and we're going to get into it because we are not prepared, which is why we have this radio show, Prepping for the Grand Solar Minimum. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining us, Anita.
You're welcome.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. This is going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea, and coming live from Kensington. Relax. Let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio, at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, folks. This is Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, bringing you the second half of The Inconvenient Truth with our guest, Anita Bailey, Ph.D., author of Cold Times, which you guys can buy below this video for the lowest price on the planet with free shipping. I'm sure she sold a lot of books because a lot of people are interested in preparing for the times that come. One of the things we really don't know a lot about, and we're uncovering just the vulnerability of the entire planet to this CME EMP threat, which is imminent, folks. This is not a hypothesis. This is not anthropogenic global warming theory. This is imminent. It's past due, 50 years past due for a Carrington event. Let me run down the summary. We're looking at 3 to 5 CMEs per week as we descend into the grand minimum. 50 years overdue for a Carrington-class CME. We don't know much about them. The only thing we have to study was so long ago, we barely have any scientific information about it, just historical accounts. There's no way to predict when one may occur. They will shut down portions of the grid. Major electronics will be fried forever. Some vehicles post-1986 will never, ever work, ever. Probable highway gridlock, panic, forests may light on fire. You're going to have preparedness groups that are overwhelmed, and no one is coming to help you. And the kicker, government and individual preparedness is pathetic. And you know what we say, proper prior planning prevents piss-poor performance when the entire earth is burning. Now, I find it ironic that the mainstream plasma physicists, Anita, they do a regular yearly solar flare type mock-up with the all of the radio propagators. Do you know about that thing? And are they really testing anything by doing that big solar flare mock-up or whatever it's called?
I can't tell you a thing about that. I have a condition. I have a condition. My condition is tech blindness. It's kind of like color blindness. I don't understand technology. I don't get it. So unless it's point and click, it's pretty much out of my capacity. But if you're knowledgeable about that, I'd just be thrilled to hear something.
Well, the American Association of Radio Astronomers, we're talking, ham radio operators, they do a major solar flare drill annually where they
970264107 can't take your call now. At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, simply hang up or press pound for further options. At the tone.
Scott, you there?
We're back. Scott, we're on. We've got cut off here at the radio. This is the second time in maybe the last 7 shows we've been cut off. I don't know if we're still live on the air. I'm waiting for confirmation from Scott. If you could get on the line here and tell me I'm not talking into an empty phone.
I can hear you on Skype. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're here. Now let's keep talking, Anita. I don't know when we got cut off. Do you have any idea?
The last I heard was about the ham radio operators getting together, and boom, you were gone.
Okay, good. So why does nuclear EMP risk receive media focus every 2 years or so?
And you're gone again.
I'm here.
Okay.
Okay. Why does nuclear EMP risk receive the media focus every couple years or so?
I do not know. I can guess. Benefit from them focusing on it, but why I don't. Remediation is supposed to, according to the authorities, only cost around $2 billion, which is like a drop in the bucket today. So where's the remediation going on? Are they working on this EMP thing to keep people scared or keep people nervous about what's happening in the world? I'm at a loss. I don't know.
Yeah, so this is interesting because there have been papers coming out in the last decade
working to clear up the cyber hack. They're not working on it. So then the question that came to my mind is EMP overrated? Is this something kind of like global warming that's being brought up repeatedly for an agenda? I hate to think like that, but I've gotten so cynical now. I tend to look at it and say, well, who the heck is getting a benefit out of this? And I don't have an answer for that because the only material I've been able to find is scientific and people are concerned. Now,
and the papers coming out are showing that if we do experience a Carrington event and the grids go down globally and the world lights on fire, God knows the cost, but just the cost of replacing the grid would be the entire cost of all the money on the planet in the upwards of $5 trillion and take up to 3 to 10 years just to electrify cities. So we're talking going back into the Stone Age, creating money that doesn't exist while all these other catastrophes are simultaneously occurring. Like we have to put out all the fires burning first before we put the grid up. So no one's thinking about this. It's amazing.
Yeah. And perhaps that is why people don't think about it. I mean, I was joking in the last segment there and periodically laughing because when you start thinking about this, it's so horrifying. The only place to go is to retreat into humor or to just not think about it. And you have to look at the people in government who are being given this information and being told, look, there's a risk here. This is a bad thing. People could die. And a politician who's concerned about being reelected or dealing with the fiscal issues or goodness knows what else is going on there in the state and national capital, EMP has got to be way far behind, especially CME, in their thinking. And these people are, how can I put this? They're just as dumb as the rest of us are. It isn't a bunch of geniuses up there. These are people who have, personal problems, who have health issues, just like everybody else. And then they have the public pulling at them in every direction. So you can see it's easy to ignore it when, it never happened before. So probably it'll never happen, right?
Oh, well, maybe that's their mindset. But if you go a step higher, then let's talk about the shadow governments, the Bilderbergs, those types, whoever they are, the Illuminati. Now, they're the ones controlling the narrative. So in their eyes, wouldn't a CME affecting Earth, if we weren't prepared, simply be the most amazing way to control the population?
Yes, it certainly would be. Presuming, as people in power frequently do, that they're immune from it. And I'm pretty sure they all use their cell phones, and I'm pretty sure they're not all hardened. And you think of the people in government in the last administration using their personal phones that hackers could get into. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. So
it's stupid all the way to the top because there are stupid people at every level.
Yes, I'll say that. So, and
now,
that's...
Anita, are we fear mongers? Is this all BS? Are we just doing this so that we get all the fame and fortune and all the money? That's why we're here.
Goodness, yes, the fame and fortune. You've never seen a picture of me, have you?
I create enemies every day, trust me.
No kidding. It's great. You must be doing right. Well, we do know that CMEs can't be controlled, or at least we believe they can't be controlled. So even the shadow government has to be sitting there going, geez, if this comes in, it's going to happen when we least expect it.
But they're going to put a cyber network, a shield up in space, like a net, a web net, right, to protect us.
No kidding.
That's what I read.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. How are they going to get that up there and have it just sit there? I don't
And
understand.
then when all of the satellites are re-entering from the shield during the Carrington event, how are we going to put out the fires?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the more you think about it, the more horrific it really is. And
all right, so it's not fake. It is real. People need to be preparing for this because it's inevitable. And it is part of the descent into the grand solar minimum and the chaos that will ensue. Maybe the crop losses will cause global unrest first, but it doesn't matter. We need to be prepared for all contingencies because you need to be prepared and not scared. You need to live your day in the moment, enjoy what you have. Things change all the time, and now we know it's cyclic. So let's be prepared for what is inevitable. How do we prepare?
Well, we have to think back in the history and look at the people who lived through the Carrington event. Mostly, it was a really big sky show and auroras, and isn't this interesting, and some telegraph problems and a few little fires. We live in an entirely different world now, but our basic needs are the same. We still need water, we need food, we need shelter, and we need a way to defend it. Those basics never change, and those are the things in any kind of preparedness we need to focus on. The place you choose for shelter probably needs to be different for grand solar minimum kind of event, just the economy crashing. I mean, that would be bad enough. But if you're living in a high-rise or a densely populated area, that's not good for either a CME or a grand solar minimum. So seriously, be thinking about getting somewhere else, moving out in the country somewhere. Now, I want to tell you, if we have a Carrington-type event and the grid goes down in a big way, the first places that any surviving electrical skilled people are going to try to save are going to be the city areas, the populated areas. That's where National Guard will be concentrated if they can be mobilized. That's where government people live, so they're going to skew those first. So anybody who lives out in the country, you're pretty much going to be on your own, and that's the, they're going to just leave us in lives. So food, water, it's the same as any other disaster scenario, but the difference is that a CME type event coupled with the grand solar minimum is likely to be really long term. Even if you're in the city, you're going to be put on very short rations because food isn't going to be available. Out in the country, you store as much food as you possibly can. A year, 2 years would be sensible. I mean, that's good for the grand solar minimum too, but for the grand solar minimum plus a CME, even if you have tractors, you may not get them to roll because you can't get the fuel.
If you watch channels like ours, you're going to have time. If it happens, while I'm making the video, I'm going to stay up and make another video to tell everyone now's the time to go. If you don't have this stuff you need, go to the store now. You'll be the first one there. You need to spend all the money you have on all the important supplies to get you through, to live. We're talking food, dried beans. So you need a list. If you're in a city, you will have a 24-hour period to get out. As the CME is hitting, you'll be driving away from population centers and the fires. So you can have a plan like that to bug out of a city. I would not stay in there because you don't know how severe it will be. There's not enough time to really figure out where the major impacts will be globally until it starts happening. And it'll be too late if you're in the city and your high-rise apartment lights on fire. You won't get out.
Yes. If you're still in, confused. while they're going, what the heck, being concerned, you need to be on the road.
Yeah.
If you can drive your car, great. If you don't have a car, please have a bicycle and get going. If not, get those really good hiking shoes and have a place to go to. Don't just think you're going to go hiking out in the country and live in the national forest, because you're not. No matter how skilled you are, it's not going to happen. We're in the grand solar minimum. There's high winds and hail and unseasonable cold and floods and volcanoes and, goodness gracious, lightning and plasma discharges. You're not going to live in a tent in the woods, especially by yourself. So let's get past that whole fantasy that is so popular among so many preppers. That, to my mind, is simply a desire to get out of your existing life. And I can understand that, because our lives have become so complicated and so controlled that desire to be out of that situation. One thing I mentioned before is my personal tech blind. Point click, Faraday cages are maybe save some of the tech.
Anita, you're really breaking
I absolutely
up.
Adore.
Can you hear me, Anita? You're really breaking up really badly.
I can hear you. You're breaking up too. The Skype connection here is just awful.
Okay.
If we could go back to the phone, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, Scott, can you call her on her landline? Hello, Scott. You're on mute, Scott. Take it off mute.
I know. I'm still on mute. That's what happened last time. Just a second. Let me call you back, Anita.
Okay.
Okay.
So as we called Anita back, we're about to talk about the last two parts on her outline as we get through this 26-page paper that she's worked tirelessly on. Actually, there's 5 more parts, so we're going to have to run through it. But you guys listening out there, you are going to get a link to this exclusive PDF, which you need to download in hard copy. Take it, make a few copies, give it to the people you love. It's a primer. It's going to get them to start at least to think about the EMP CME problem that's imminent. So if they're still global warming alarmists and you like these people, maybe this will open their eyes to something that they can be on board with you as well. And you can be part of, let's say, a community, so to speak, of preparedness. You don't have to be on board with the climate change, so to speak, but this is some pretty breathtaking information that when you actually sit down to think about it, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling that throughout the globe there aren't other governments really doing anything about it to protect their grid resilience, to protect the communities, because this event is inevitable. And if you speak to scientists like myself and others that are in the grand solar minimum awareness field, we know that the magnetosphere of the planet is waning, and we know that that is going to allow these space weather effects to intensify. As the magnetosphere wanes, the space weather effects are going to cause more and more perturbations to the grid. And what's even more amazing is that the mainstream is not picking up on it. They have no idea. Even the major multinational corporations that are recently being affected by space weather, i.e., we have air traffic control going down in the last year in Atlanta, Virgin Airlines, they're all receiving major outages, which they explain in the mainstream as unknown or computer glitches. But observers like you and I know that they're associated with space weather, specifically solar storms, G6 or greater, that are causing these perturbations in the air traffic control and in the grid. And the companies, they don't know what's happening. Either that or they're covering it up, and it could go either way, but nonetheless, it doesn't matter. We need to be preparing for this. Just like we're trying to get Anita back on the phone.
And she should be back.
She's back. Okay, excellent. Excellent, you're back. So did you hear how I was discussing that these grid failures are happening now in the form of geomagnetic perturbations during storms to things like air traffic control. Atlanta went down, and we had British Virgin Airlines go down during geomagnetic storms, and the companies explained that they didn't know what happened.
Ben Davidson on Suspicious Observers has noticed that there'll be transformer failures during some of these events. And he spots them and says, well, here's one during an event. It's a correlation. It may not be causation, but it's a pretty remarkable effect to see that happening. The challenge, of course, is we don't know which one's going to be hit or why. We just know
right, but during a Carrington-type event, everything's going to be affected in a large scale, at least half of the globe.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the side that's facing it.
Yeah,
and
so let's...
a couple of pulses, goodness knows.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. So let's go into your tech blindness. You were saying...
Okay. Faraday cages. There's a lot of good information on the internet. Just use your good discretion. The hillbilly version that Lee Wheelbarger was mentioning, and I absolutely adore him. I think he's brilliant. Is just a big trash can. Line it with a couple of layers of cardboard so that the things you put inside don't touch the metal, and pack things in there that you're going to need, that you think you need, and put the layers of cardboard on it, and then put your lid on and seal it with aluminum duct tape, the kind you would use for air ducting. That way you have a sealed environment that is protected. Do not ground it, because you don't want to pick up the ground charge and put that into your stuff. And if you store this inside a metal building like a garage, you're likely to have your supplies come through. Likely is the key word, because we don't know about CMEs. The things you might want to put in there, if you're a techie kind of person, you feel like you cannot survive without it, would be all your data stored on what are called archival CDs and DVDs. These will last for 20, 30 years, and you will need something to read them. Flash drives may be affected. We don't know. So you want that closer to a firm surface that's not going to have a lot of electronics in it. A couple of laptops in there, your handheld radio, shortwave receiver. Night vision would be awful handy if there aren't any lights and you and your family are the only people who have that. Now, night vision is really pricey, but they're fun to use, and you can use them if you're a hunter and things like that, too. So they have a use. Just store it inside your Faraday cage. Solar inverters, controller for your solar system, anything that is electronic that you need to run your current system, put it at least one in the Faraday cage, and better, if you're dependent on it, to have 2 or 3. That's a big expense, but that'll help preserve your electronics. The downside of dependence on that is that the Faraday cage only protects items that are inside of it. Having a Faraday cage and having your computer, your laptop out and plugged into the wall, it's not protected. Multiple CMEs, if they occur, and we talked about the Carrington event with the 2 pulses. We don't know if CMEs can stack, so you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all of a sudden. We just don't know. We don't know. So if you have something in a Faraday cage, the event has come and gone, the auroras are gone, you're feeling pretty confident, and you take your stuff out, now you don't have any grid, so you don't know if something else is coming in. And you're using your computer, and it's plugged into your great solar system, and boom, it's done. So that's why I suggest if you're going to go that route, you need your multiple backups. 2 is 1, 1 is none. 3 is 2. So be keeping that in mind. If EMPs or cyber attacks are timed to follow that CME, you can lose items that you take out of your Faraday cage too. So if you've only got one of everything, let it sit in there a month, maybe 2 months, to make sure that you're not subject to a secondary effect. And by golly, if you see an aurora, put your stuff back in the Faraday cage.
Yeah, and Lee Wheelbarger and I talk about his charge controllers. They're huge. You need big trash cans if you have a big solar system to put a charge controller in there. But what you can do is line your battery shed, or make a shed with your charge controllers and batteries in it that's lined with copper mesh, and then seal the door during the event. This will give you a Faraday room. So if you want to go turn on something because you have to play your game or whatever, and you're in the Faraday room and a secret CME comes by, or EMP, you'll be at least safe. And you'll have a very large Faraday cage. It's quite expensive, but maybe worth the expense if you have the money.
Yeah, and that's a challenge. Some things are worth it and some things are not. Now, I like my computer. I use it all the time. And I would be very unhappy to see it no longer work, but I can live without it, okay? And I think most of us don't realize how we have become ultra-dependent on our electronics for contact with other people, for feeling normal. You know, the grid goes down for a weather event, and people get antsy and start wondering, what am I going to do? And we're so dependent on it. Farmers in the old days used to look at the sky and they could tell what the weather was going to be. Who looks at the sky anymore? And you get on the internet and you look at Windy, or you look at some other site and you go, well, yeah, I think it's going to rain, or it's going to be good tomorrow. How much we have lost. So in my mind, when I'm looking at these events and putting this all together, what will survive? Well, we know books are going to survive. Pencils are going to come through this. Writing paper. How about a manually operated mimeograph? Does anybody remember those things? You know, that smelled so good when the teacher gave you the paper because it was loaded with alcohol. The ability to do mathematics in your head or do it on paper. If you come through this CME and your group is good and your family's okay and you want to build a house, how are you going to figure out how much materials you need? Where are you going to get them? Somebody's got to be able to do math on paper. If you have vital skills, such as a protocol for fixing a generator, or how to handle flu cases with your family, you got to write that down. You need to make it so that the knowledge is not concentrated in one person. If you have a doctor in your group or a dentist, they need to be teaching other people how to do what they do, because if something happens to that one person, you don't want that skill to disappear. You need to be passing this on. Ultimately, in the event that things really go that way, as bad as it could be, you don't want to travel either. You might have a car that you've an old 65 pickup that's all manual and four-wheel drive, and it's running good and it wasn't affected, and you've got fuel, but where do you want to go? Do you really want to be the only car on the road when desperate people are out looking for anything to eat or somebody to help them? It's a horrible thought. But if you got a tractor, if you got a farm, you need that old tractor that is lacking in electronics, and you need your diesel stored up. Remember, when you run your tractor, everybody can hear it. So you're plowing your field to grow the corn that you put the seeds back from, and as you're running that tractor, people from miles around will hear that, and it'll be like a lighthouse beacon drawing in people who are desperate for assistance. So we have a lot of concerns and challenges and questions that go with this that nobody has an answer for. Traveling, ideally, would be on back roads and as quiet as humanly possible, which is probably walking. Even a horse and cart, they make a lot of noise. So it's potentially a really scary future world. Certainly, people need, even today, you need defensive skills. Most of us, we kind of live in our little bubble, a little safety bubble, and you go out in public and you don't look at people because it's impolite and you don't want them staring at you. But that guy to your left and the guy to your right who are kind of coming up on you, are they nice people? Or are they flanking you so that they can knock you in the head and grab your wallet and run off? Most of us who are staring at our phones or have our earbuds in, we're not paying attention. We just don't know. And because of that, we make ourselves open to risk. That's today. Imagine a world that is much more, what's a good word? Vulnerable out there. You certainly don't want to be unaware of your environment. You want to look at people, stare at them. It's not a crime. And watch their hands. See where their hands in the pockets, hand behind their back. You need to be concerned. Listen to your gut feeling. If it tells you walk away, walk away. Run away if you have to. Traveling groups. The more people that is with you, the less likely you're going to get into trouble. And be the gray man. Become gray. Try to become as ordinary as possible. Wear the same kind of clothes as everybody else. Jeans and an unbranded T-shirt and a little shirt over that, and carry your defensive supplies, a taser, pepper spray, a handgun of some kind. Do not break laws now. Do not break any laws. Some regions don't allow you to have self-defensive weapons. So be sensible about that. If you carry defensive, know how to use it. Don't just think you're safe because you've got a handgun in your pocket. You have to be able to pull it out and use it in the blink of an eye and use it sensibly. You don't want to be shooting up the neighborhood. So these are skills, and they're learned skills, and they can be fun to learn. People go into martial arts just because it's fun, and it's useful too. So be thinking about that.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone out there listening wants to be traveling in a post-apocalyptic world, which is after a major CME, Carrington-like event. And the way it will unfold is it will happen, there will be no information told, and then the ones that know, the very limited, it will leak out, and then the population will panic, and then it will be very quiet for about a week while you shelter in place and hopefully are at where you need to be. And then they'll be giving the announcements that nothing is coming on anytime soon, and then it's game on. So if you're in a population center, it will begin. The riots and looting begin as soon as the announcement is made. And if you're not out of Dodge, you're not going to fare very well, and it's a nightmare. So if you have a family you want to protect, you really need an escape plan or need to be away from a population center. Because when those things happen, maybe 7 days after the event, and people are really, getting antsy, it's all over, and it will be a nightmare. But if you're in a place where you need to be and you're properly prepared, you change your complete mindset and you start stockpiling wild edibles, you're hunting, you're getting meat, and you're preparing your defenses. So it's a brave new world, and you need to be ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. People have come through terrible situations in the past. There's a certain amount of luck that goes with it, but we're fortunate in that we have history to look back on. And say, what do people do in these situations? What have they done historically? That's what they're going to do again. One of the one of the issues that comes up with social collapse during wartime and when civilizations come apart is that sometimes people settle old grudges. You know, that guy who took your girl to the prom 25 years ago, he's got a grudge. And, you know, he might just decide he's going to take care of that. And there's you can be friends with everybody, and there's somebody who doesn't like you, and they're a little whacked out by the situation, and they decide they're going to solve this thing that's bothered them for a long time. So you can have things coming out of the blue. You don't even remember the guy, you know, or the incident or whatever. And so that defensive capability and recognizing that things are going to happen that you can't even imagine now. The world's going to make a change in a way we can't even think of it. So we have to be able to roll with the punches and to get back up and to keep adapting. That's how people survive things like this. How can you know what a CME might be like? And this is the big challenge. We can talk about it, we can theorize and create scenarios, but the best way for any one person to find out is to get up, take a 3-day weekend, turn off the power to your house. Turn it all off. And when I've suggested this in the past, I said, hey, leave your refrigerator on. Turn it off. Turn everything off. Now, you don't have a phone. You can't communicate. There's no entertainment. You don't have your computer. You don't know what the weather's going to be like. How are you going to keep cool and keep warm? What if it's a cold day? How are you going to flush your toilet? Where are you going to get the water from? Have you thought this through? If the power went off right now, where are you going to get your drinking water from? How long will it last? Are you going to filter it? Boil it? How are you going to boil it? Do you have enough medication to last? Anyone in your family who needs it? How are you going to cook? Do you have can openers? Can you open all the cans that you have, all the 6 cans you have in the cupboard there in the kitchen? With the refrigerator and freezer, what's going to happen to the food in that? Is it going to turn to poison overnight? No. Sometimes people think if it's got an expiration date on it, it turns to poison that date, but it doesn't. So you're going to have to eat everything in the refrigerator and all the ice cream out of the freezer and then figure out what you're going to do with that meat you got on sale. What are you going to do with it? Can you cook it all? Are you going to eat it all? Are you going to can it? Do you really want to be canning during a social collapse when your neighbors are running around in a panic? You understand where I'm going with this. If you create a circumstance where you are experiencing what a CME might be like on a very simple level, that brings it home. And that's when you start to realize where your personal vulnerabilities are and where you need to strengthen your own situation. Once again, how are you going to occupy the kids? If you got kids in your house, oh my goodness, they're used to texting all their friends and you know, playing video games and watching DVDs. What are they going to do? Just get in your hair and annoy you the whole time? How do you get around the house without lights on? Do you have enough flashlights for everybody? What if the flashlights have an electronic component and don't work? How about at night when you hear a strange noise outside? How are you going to respond to that? That's right now. You know, there are home invasions going on right now. Imagine how much more severe that instance will be if the bad people who are doing that know that you can't call the police. It becomes an exercise in understanding your own situation. And it's probably one of the most vivid ways to understand a potential CME. Now, it's helpful for a CME, but add the grand solar minimum on top, and you've got a sudden hailstorm coming in, it's freezing cold, and oh my gosh.
Yeah, so you're going to need, when you do the 3-day experiment, what everyone's going to find out is that they don't have a backup power supply.
Yes, that's true. That's the big discovery. And now what do you do?
And even if you do have a backup, let's say it runs on gas or it's solar, these parts eventually break. So at some point down the road, you're going to have to downsize. You're going to have to change everything. We're talking about learning all new skills and a whole new way of life. And starting now, should be everyone's hobby.
Mm-hmm. And learning new skills is very satisfying. It's profoundly satisfying.
Especially if it's shooting machine guns.
Yes.
You know that.
I have.
A lot of people that are scared of weapons, when they know how to safely discharge one, they are suddenly amazed that they're not scared of weapons.
Yes, that's right. That's really true. And it's very exciting. The first time I shot an AR, somebody handed it to me and said, "Here, try this out." And I went, "Oh my gosh, this thing is." I'm just it's going to explode. And I shot it, and pretty soon I was burning up ammo like crazy. And the poor guy was going, "I don't have any more. Give me some more. Give me some more." It was just fun beyond words. And that's the same thing. You become, as you learn these skills, you become more self-reliant. Your car breaks down. You can actually pop the hood and look at it and say, "Oh, here's where the problem is." Sometimes electronic cars, it's much harder to change a tire so that you're not there waiting by the side of the road for the auto club to show up. That's a useful skill. And when you become self-reliant, you become self-governing. That's where you start saying, "I can do this. Is this a choice that I wish to make at this time, or am I going to do something else?" Now somebody else isn't making decisions for your life. You're making the decisions. And if you're head of household, you can say, "This will be good for my family, and so we can do this thing," instead of just being blown by the wind or marching off to some camp because somebody said there's food here. So you have more choices. You have options. And that's what these skills give you, are options for the future. That's your real power. So,
yeah, another great basic skill is orienteering. If you don't know what that is, it's the use of a compass and a map, where you can literally be dropped into a place with a compass and a map and get out or move around successfully.
And you think just, a generation or two ago, any Boy Scout could do that.
Yeah.
And now, goodness, when I was doing search and rescue, there were former military people involved in that who couldn't understand it, who didn't. And like I said, I'm tech blind. But I can hold a compass, and I can find north, and I can find it on the map and figure out where I am. So that doesn't require high technical skills. And
no, practice. It requires practice.
That's right, yep. And then you learn to use what do they call them, ranger beads, where you can guesstimate your distance by counting your steps and knowing how long your steps are. And moving beads on a cord. Suddenly you have a way of record keeping that doesn't require a computer or a GPS or any of that stuff, where you can actually determine where you are out in the middle of nowhere. Talk about self-reliance and giving yourself options. Oh my goodness.
And now while you're out there in the middle of nowhere orienteering, in your backpack, you have your survival kit, which has a book on local wild edibles, and then you can be eating the blackberries and raspberries, wild strawberries, gooseberries, or any of the fruit that is ripe at the time you're learning how to use a compass, because you're also learning how to collect wild food.
That's right, and because you have that book, you're not eating the poke berries or the berries that will give you the magic flushing effect. So you have a real power there. I'll tell you a little story. My son-in-law didn't carry a pocket knife, and I got him a a Swiss Army knife with a whole bunch of attachments on them. You know, those really fun ones, with scissors and a little saw and all of that stuff. He used that knife any chance he got. He'd pull it out, and people were just amazed at the things. He could put screws in and take screws out with that. And you know, I was happy for him, but it staggered me that so few people understood. You know, you can carry one of these Leatherman things, and it's like a little toolkit in your pocket. And the Swiss Army knife is a little smaller version of a Leatherman that doesn't quite have as many tools, but it'll do a lot of cool stuff. So something as simple as that gives you options. Options.
Yeah, you need options.
Yes, exactly.
What are some other ways we can become self-reliant now that we haven't discussed?
Well, you know, I have a medical background, and I think the more you know about maintaining and improving your health, the better you are in the long run. I advocate the simplest form of health improvement, which is walking. Most of us do not walk enough. I've seen pictures of you out in your property. You got plenty of room there, and you're hiking all over the place. Best thing you can do for cardiac fitness, for keeping yourself in shape, for understanding how far you can go, and then ideally you put a little weight on by carrying a backpack. Now you've got 25, 30 pounds, probably no more than that for the average person, and that makes it a little more stressful. See if you can walk a little faster. You don't have to run or jog or do calisthenics or anything. If you get out and walk, you will be in better shape in 3 months than you've been in years. In fact, you'll probably lose a good 10 pounds just from walking. Change nothing else, just get out and walk. And keeping back a store of vitamins, supplies that you need. CBD oil, you your contact with that. It's a fabulous, fabulous thing. Learning how to make medicine from plants in your environment. The opium lettuce is a good example that you brought up before. There's so many things that I'm back to, things we have forgotten, things that our ancestors knew. The willow trees are common in my area, really good for pain relief. It's like an aspirin in a stick. Easy to find, easy to use, not much in the way of downside on them, but it's knowledge. And once again, knowledge and experience and skill gives you... You
can eat the spring willow leaves when they're first emerging, and they're one of the highest vitamin-rich plant in the forest, and they're delicious.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. Anyone who hasn't tried growing... oh, goodness, it was just on the tip of my tongue. That tropical plant that grows so well. You know, you reach a certain age and things come in your head and they go out really fast.
Yeah, the wild edibles is the key. I mean, plantain, it can be used for medicinal purposes. It can be used for food, dandelion. Everyone can take steps, just like Ice Age Farmer says, every day towards self-sufficiency. And I can't implore you enough to start growing your own food. The purpose of our project here is to be 100% self-reliant in the end. And in the beginning, we started with eating zero of our own food, and this is 3.5 years ago. And then it went up to 5, 10, 20%, and it's increasing daily, where we eventually want to get to 100% of everything we're producing on site here is what we're eating. And that can be augmented with wild harvesting animals as well as plants and growing your own animals and plants. It's not very difficult, but you need to begin, because when that CME comes and you have 72 hours until it's the Stone Age, if you have nothing stockpiled, dry goods, when the food goes bad in your refrigerator, you're screwed. But if you start putting things up like beans and rice, you don't have to worry about having alternative energy because you have 2 years of food in the closet. And you also are growing food in your backyard, and you can now ramp up operations. You can teach your neighbors how to grow food. This is a community event. We need to change the mindset when the event happens, but we need to be prepared and informed to guide the uninformed into the new times so that we can all eat, live, and be happy. It's working to live, not living to work. We are going to be in a new paradigm, and you need to start learning new skills. I can't implore that enough. Can you, Anita?
No, that's absolutely right. And the thing is, it sounds daunting, but as you learn these skills, you start wanting to learn more, because the more you know, the more interesting it is. And the first egg that you eat from a hen that you raise from a chick it opens a whole new world to you. Same thing with you go out and you gather your plantain and your dandelions, and you take those dandelion flower heads and you dunk them in a little bit of pancake batter and fry them up real crisp, and my gosh, they are so good. To me, they have a little flavor of asparagus to them. Dunk them in some, ranch dressing, and you have got a highly nutritious, nearly free meal out of that your kids will eat.
But if you didn't stock 42 months worth of ranch dressing, you wouldn't have that ability.
That's true. And of course, we have. So
I know it's in your preps.
So yeah, you don't even need ranch dressing. You can just eat those babies straight. They're just delicious. So you understand what I'm saying, that the more you know, the more you're eager to know. And I'm sure you found this in your own experience when you start out and you're eating somebody else's food and you eat that lettuce that you grew. The flavor is different. The life force in it, the energy you get from it, the excitement, just way beyond. And no salad from a fast food place, even the finest restaurant salad, even comes close to it.
No, because when you're growing your wild lettuce and it's heirloom, it's back to wild lettuce. It's very close to the source. It has lacticarium in it. If you're doing research and learning about edibles, you would run into it like I did and find out how to make medicine out of lettuce. Any lettuce that has a white milk coming out of it while it's seeding, that's lacticarium. That's medicine. That's why when you start eating salads for the first time, if you never have, you feel good because you're getting high from the lacticarium in the lettuce. And this is how you can be abundant, surviving and thriving in these completely insane and chaotic times. You're going to have the micronutrients you need because you changed your diet, you changed your ways. You're getting the nutrition you need by growing your own food. It doesn't have pesticides in it that makes your eye twitch a little or that little twitch in your shoulder from your Diet Coke. Stop it. Foods that are processed or you buy in the center area of the supermarket are killing you. It is in your best interest to learn these skills for when this event occurs, you'll be ready. And in the meantime, you're going to be building your health and staying away from the doctor. I've not been to the doctor in over a decade, and I don't ever want to go there. So I continue to grow my own food, eat healthy, and when I start feeling sick, I know all the lost remedies that I can boost my immune system. I can eat more salads and vegetables and get my nutrient concentrations up so that I fight off that illness. That's how I've been living for years, and my medicine is my food. I can't implore you enough to start growing your own food. You're going to feel better, you're going to be more self-sufficient, and you're going to be prepared to teach others how to do that skill so you can all survive in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's true. It's very, very true. Don't forget to get your D vitamins by getting some sun on your skin, too. Most people in our country are deficient in D vitamins because we don't get out in the sun. We're sitting under that darn fluorescent light that's messing with our brains and robbing us of one of the most critical nutrients that protects against cancer and disease of all different kinds. So take a little sun bath every other day. Enjoy. You can
Yeah,
rest.
and what we learned from the Grand Solar Minimum research is that people who survived and thrived in the past in these darker episodes, 1600s and 1800s, when it was cloudy continuously for years, it's hard to get that vitamin D, but you can supplement your diet with mushrooms. So what happens is you have this huge fungal bloom when it gets gloomy out, and the people that are starving eat the mushrooms. They inadvertently save their lives because mushrooms contain huge amounts of vitamin D. And these are the types of information you need to learn to be self-resilient. You also don't want to be eating poisonous mushrooms, so join a local mushroom group. Go out and pick wild mushrooms. They also can link you up to other wild edible groups. There are millions of people now learning to survive and thrive on wild edibles, including fungus.
It's a wonderful thing. The more people who know, the better it is for everyone.
But we're not going to do this alone. It's going to be a community event. That's why Anita is sharing her research with you, because she is concerned, just like I am, why I have the channel. We think this information. Our purpose on Earth is to tell people. Her purpose is to, tell people how to be prepared for anything. Preparedness is her mission. My mission is to tell people about the lies that the media has been perpetrating for a decade. And I changed focus, and our focus now is on the weather and your survival. My scientific background and the position I put myself in makes it very unique for me to be very honest with you. There are not a lot of people that are going to be as honest with you as I am. And it's my mission to share my honesty with you, because what I see happening in the mainstream is corrupt, it is criminal, and I believe that those that are aware, those that are awakened, we're going to come out on the other side together, because we're going to do this as a community. We're not going to do it alone. Anita, thank you for joining us tonight. Guys, below the video, you're going to have links to her book, Cold Times, How to Survive and Thrive in the Coming Cold Times, Prepping for the Mini Ice Age. It's the cheapest you can get it with free shipping from Octoritas Publishing. There's also going to be links to her PDF, the one that we talked about in great depth tonight, EMP, CME, and Grand Solar Minimum, preparing for the risks of electrical grid disruptions. It is in your best interest to start preparing now. We gave you all the keys. We can keep talking about it week after week, but you need to start now. Do you have any closing words? And thanks again, Anita, for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. And take it to heart, people. It's not just listening. You have to take action. And that's going to give you your options.
Yeah, thanks again. The powers that be know that this event is imminent. They're not doing anything about it. It's up to you to do something about it. No one is going to walk you through these earth-changing times that we are living through. Let history be your guide. Get all the information you can on the Maunder Minimum, on the Dalton Minimum, and the historical accounts. Anita mentioned that there's even a movie about it. Go get it.